Another episode of the Running Tales podcast, part of the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network. Here on Running Tales, we like to tell the extraordinary stories of everyday athletes who do amazing things, from marathons to ultras, to, for some people, just simply their first 5K. My name is Craig Lewis, and as I say, Running Tales is part of the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network, which now has grown to have 9 really wonderful and really cool shows on it. Shows like Beyond the Finish Line with Joe Harden, check that out. The Food Fight Friday with Jason and Adam Lee, that's always good for a laugh. And I have to say, one of the newest shows and one of my favourites now is Melanin MVP, and that is with none other than Angela Hollowell, today's guest. So look, what I'm going to tell you first is our podcasts, give us a positive rating and review. That brings more people along to listen to episodes like this. But what I'm going to do second is very, very quickly bring Angela forward, and we'll have a chat all about the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network, about Millennium MVP, and about everything that Angela does. Hi, Angela. How are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Not too bad. So here you are on your own network, or what you're part of. Tell us first of all about Melanin MVP and how you came to be part of this Everyday Athlete Podcast Network.
Yeah, sure. So Melanin MVP is a newsletter kind of writing project that I started around the Olympics last year. I had really been interested in women's sports. It was right during the middle of the WNBA season, which I was a huge fan of and still am. And I was like, if I don't start now, I'm never going to start. So I started writing just about the Olympics and women of color, not just in America, but across the world, who are doing incredible things at the Olympics, and I wanted to keep it going, so I did. Um, but I was like, what does keeping it going mean? What does this mean? And I reached out to Jason because I had seen some of his posts about Run Try Bike and the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network, and he was just really gracious with his time. And we had just kind of an initial talk, and I kind of walked away from that saying, okay, I feel motivated to, yes, keep going, but also to keep experimenting with this and see where I can take it. And at that point, I hadn't started a podcast yet, but I came back around December and I said, I think I want to start a podcast with this next year. And I reached out to Jason, and I did not plan on asking him to join the podcast network. I've never been a part of a podcast network, but I was just like, let me just see what would happen. What would happen if I asked him? What does that look like? And he was surprisingly open to it. I think he was surprised as well. But he at least was like, let me talk to my business partner. Let me just see if that's something that we have capacity for, but something we're interested in. And we kept the conversation going. And I joined just before I started my first, or released my first podcast episode for Melanin MVP. So it's been an interesting ride. It's been a short ride, but it's been a very beautiful roller coaster of good things and emotions and all that.
Yeah, I'm laughing at the story because it certainly sounds kind of familiar to me as well, and I suspect you could ask all. Well, I was going to say all 9. It's not quite 9 because there's some overlaps on the shows, but all of us who are a part of the network have probably got similar stories about similar conversations with Jason, who's the man behind the show and behind the scenes today. But yeah, in terms of Melanin MVP, you concentrate your stories, as you said there, on women of color and so on. And it might sound a really obvious question, but what was the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I think it's obvious to me. It may not be obvious to some people, but um, one, there are a couple of interesting stories around the time of the Olympics, two of which that I think were fairly well known. One of which was that people felt that Caitlin Clark got snubbed by the Olympic team, Olympic women's basketball team. And another one, which was that Sha'Carri Richardson was going to be premiering in the first time this Olympics because she was disqualified during the Tokyo Olympics in 2021. And it was very obvious to me that Black women athletes who had very much earned the right to be on the international stage were not receiving um, the all around coverage I felt like they should be receiving. They weren't receiving a soft landing space in the media that I felt like they should have. And there are a lot of stories that were not getting any mainstream attention because they weren't, producing as dramatic headlines as Caitlin Clark or Sha'Carri Richardson, two names that, honestly, at some point, it's just like, is there anything left to the imagination now? Because everybody's writing about these people, whether they want them to or not. And I said, one, I felt like I could do a better job, which is probably extremely egregious to think. But I just said, I think I can do a better job of providing a more holistic approach to covering these women. And thank you, Jason. I will think big. And I also said I feel like I can provide a space where Black women and women of color who are interested and fans of these incredible athletes can find timely coverage. They can find more editorial style coverage that is, yes, fact check, but also entertaining. And I felt like I could do that in through the newsletter and through a podcast. So that was kind of the start of it. Um, famously, famous last words are, if you don't see what you want, create it. And that was kind of how Melanin MVP came to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, just I guess playing devil's advocate for a second with some of those ideas, and I take on board everything you said, of course, but I'm just thinking really. I mean, you look at say the US sprint team, the sprint teams around the world. There's lots of people of color, women of color, who are doing amazing things and getting huge amounts of coverage. There might be some people who would come back at you and say, "It's 2025. Is that really something we need now above and beyond, or is that coverage not already just naturally happening?"
So I'll address women sprinting specifically, but then also
Yeah,
go to the larger narrative of women athletes. So, yes, there are documentaries like Sprint on Netflix. That was not at the impetus of media feeling as though they could do a better job of representing these people or giving them more coverage in mainstream media, particularly in documentaries. That was the impetus of US Grand Slam track, who is saying we need more energy, yes, around the Olympics, but also after the Olympics, because that's when everybody watches track, right? And Team USA, Team Jamaica, two incredible big track stories there for years and years and years, but also Team South Africa, Team Kenya, Team Britain, all of those stories are also coming into play. We had St. Lucia, our dog racing the horse, that we didn't
yeah.
see coming. So there's a lot of storylines there that I think I'm glad were captured. I think that is just the beginning. I think we could do more. I think that um, competitions like Athlos by Alexis Ohanian is starting to come to that. I think Grand Slam track is going to be a good improvement. But overall, this is, in the year 2025, you should also be asking, why are we only seeing two major documentaries and why are they only on Netflix? Why don't we have way more coverage about the Usain Bolts, the Shelly Ann Frazier's, the Jackie Joyner Cursors, like all these people that really should have gotten a lot more coverage, even after their time in running is over. So there's that. Overall, I think that yes, while Black women athletes are getting more, yeah, yeah, not everybody is a Netflix subscriber. So I agree with that. I think there should be more coverage of them. And yes, like a lot of Black women athletes have been getting more time in media, but again, it hasn't always been, quite frankly, kind. It has not always, quite frankly, been accurate. It has not always been measured. Whenever someone looks at Caitlin Clark wrong, there's a headline about it, right? What about the headline when they break a new record? Asia Wilson broke 1,000 points in a season, and it definitely didn't get the fanfare that it should have gotten at that game. So, which is ironically a fever game. I'm not trying to pick on Caitlin Clark. I have no problem with her, but there's a pattern here, right? About where does media coverage come into play with these women, and can it be more measured? Which I think the answer is yes. And so, how can we be a part of giving women their flowers when the flowers are timely, right? And how can we be a part of adding to the overall narrative to maybe balance it out a little bit more with these women?
No, that's really interesting, and I mean, it comes into my head there a different sport, obviously, but thinking about the type of coverage that an absolute champion and legend of the game she plays, Serena Williams, sometimes gets. I mean, how can somebody be that good and still get criticized, not only for the way she plays, but the way she looks?
Yeah,
Yeah, incredible, really.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, that just came into my head. My other thought was, as you know, we do the Substack on Running Tales, and I wrote a little piece about Melanin MVP coming along and about Tidy Pickett, who I didn't know anything about really before I wrote that piece. And for those people listening today who don't, Tidy Pickett was the first African American woman to run at the Olympics way back in 1936, and that was at the Berlin Games, and she had the, I'm sure, great joy of doing that in front of none other than Adolf Hitler. So wow, as much as anything else. But yeah, we spoke about to Dr. Terence House on last week's Running Tales about that. And sorry, this is a really long question, but basically what I'm talking about now is kind of that she was excluded from the US team, and that happened in 1936. And some of the bite back I got from people on that was, well, that was 1936. It doesn't happen now. But I guess kind of what you're saying is, well, actually have a look a bit closer, and this is still an issue.
yeah. A little bit, yeah. And I think, exclusion can look a lot of different ways. Exclusion could be media coverage, exclusion could be brand deals, access to sponsors. And exclusion can really mean pay, which a lot of it does now, is women's pay for women athletes is not where it needs to be in comparison to their male counterparts.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think? I mean, we've spoken about elite athletes for much of the conversation so far, but how do you think that um, is reflected when it comes to kind of the everyday athletes that we like to talk about on this network, and in particular, I suppose, with endurance sports, because you see a lot less um, black faces. Certainly in the UK, I think it's the same over in the States in endurance racing than you do sprints and all those sort of things. And that, yes, it strikes me as old, really.
Yeah, I think something that I'm noticing as I'm interviewing everyday athletes and kind of working in this space now is that two things. One, people of color, and particularly women of color, they participate in sports and they support athletes because it is a social activity, not necessarily because they want to compete. There are people who do competitive racing, competitive cycling, competitive running. They're trying to beat their last PR at their next marathon, but ultimately, they're doing it and they're participating in a race because they're going to see their friends. They're going to hang out. They get to train with their friends. It's a social activity for them more so than it is this competitive thing. And the other half of that is some of it is access, right? In America, we could do a lot better in terms of infrastructure that would allow people to safely bike and run and swim in their local communities. So I think that, one of them is systemic, it's going to be a long time to change that. But the other one, I think, is just a recognition of the fact that people have different motivations for working out or participating in races and rides.
Yeah. So I want to move slightly away from that conversation because I think it's really interesting, but also it's kind of has um, I don't know if negative connotations is the is a fair thing to say, but it sort of does. And I think what you're doing is trying to be super positive about everything and bring these wonderful stories forward. So let's talk about some of those stories and that you've had on the podcast so far. I listened to, I'm going to forget the lady's name, so apologies to her. The lady you had on was from Fast Chicks. That was just an incredible story. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. I loved it.
Yeah, Ivana's a character. She's great. But she was a military veteran. When she was in the military, she was moving around. She got into triathlete competitions and training. And when she left, she said, I want to keep doing this, but I want to see more people that look like me. So again, she's like, I don't see it, so I'm going to create it. And she
Yeah.
created this incredible network of women across the United States who compete in triathletes and support each other at different races. And I love her approach to it. I think she could have easily just left it at, this is a social thing. We're just supporting people who are already in the space. But she does a lot of work, one in recruiting me, but also in recruiting other people to get into triathlons and training and supporting each other through sharing gear if they have it, sharing resources, talking about different races they're going to be at, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be a real theme, doesn't it? The idea of kind of, if it doesn't exist, go out and create it. How much is that a guiding light, both in what you do, but in the stories of the people you speak to?
I would say it's pretty up there. It's pretty up there as a North Star. And I think for some people, because we've had like Latino Outdoors come on and they do a lot of just outdoor activities um, for people to get outdoors and get active with their community all across the country. Um, we have another one coming up this month with the Montgomery Bike Club, which is, getting people out in Montgomery, Alabama, riding and advocating for bike safety. So I think, a lot of it is just that, nobody wakes up one day and is like, you know what, I'm going to change the world. Well, maybe they do. And I think that's a good thing. Maybe I'm one of those people. But some people, they're also just like starting from humble beginnings, just saying, you know what, if I'm interested in it, there's got to be somebody else that's interested in it. And if it solves a problem for these two people, that's enough. But of course, so many more people have this problem or have this desire to be a part of something that's beautiful and meaningful and that gets them moving. And who doesn't love that?
Yeah, definitely, definitely, and I suppose that brings on to the question of sort of how important do you think it is for people, just generally, to get involved and be active and get out there and be part of their community and be, I suppose, be an athlete, be a cyclist, be a runner, whatever it might be.
I think outdoor groups and just getting outside is just it's one of the best ways to one meet people, but see your local community in a different way. One of the first things I did when I moved here to North Carolina was look up outdoor Afro and see if I could connect with some people there. I connected with some people in Bike Durham, which is my local cycling group, Oaks and Spokes, which is the Raleigh cycling group. Black Girls Do Bike, incredible group here as well. We have a Raleigh Durham chapter. So all these groups, and I'm sure there are so many more that are in different places as well. But and run clubs, there's some run clubs now. I don't personally run, but those exist as well for people who are interested in that. But it's just a way to meet people. I've met so many incredible people that way. I've gotten outside to see different parts of the city that way. And you know what? Sometimes you just want a little accountability. I'm fine going for a walk or a hike or a bike ride on my own. But there's something about getting to that next to last mile right when you want to quit. And then you see everybody around you that's encouraging you, that's pushing you, sharing water with you, sharing snacks. And it's just like, you know what? I can do one more. And that's a good feeling. And that feels really, really fun. So,
Yeah, I love. I mean, I like running on my own. Sometimes I like to stick my headphones on or get out there and just get that headspace that you need every now and again on your own. But running with a group is brilliant for that accountability and just chatting and learning each other's life stories and heading off for food afterwards and all the good stuff. And you kind of find, I don't know if you find this with the cycling and stuff as well, but with me and running, you sort of find out, you think you've been running 2 miles and suddenly someone will go, "Oh, you've been running 8," and you're like, "Wow, how did that happen?" Because I've just been chatting.
yeah, I love that. I love it. It's just like the time passes differently when you're with the group.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. You mentioned the this is the Running Tales podcast, and you mentioned this the words that are like swearing for us on here. I'm not a runner myself, but before I quiz you on that, you are a cyclist. So tell us a little bit about the cycling that you do, because you've done, I think, some pretty epic cycling.
Yes, I would just say that, it was something that cycling is something that a lot of people do when we're young, and then at some point we get away from it. But thankfully, I was blessed to get back to it. I started cycling when I was super young here, and here I say here in Phoenix City, Alabama. We have a river walk that separates the states of Alabama and Georgia. And the Riverwalk, it goes for miles. It can take you all the way to the military base, and it could take you up to this beautiful thing called Oxbow Meadows, which was like this kind of gerarium, like where you could see butterflies and plants and all these other beautiful things. And me and my dad would go up to Oxbow Meadows, just about every other weekend when I was young with our bikes. And when I went to Birmingham, Alabama is very mountainous, so I kind of got away from cycling. It was quite frankly just easier for me to walk. And that's when I got into hiking, so I did a lot of hiking there. I did the Camino de Santiago in Spain while I was in college. So got into really long distance walking and hiking. And then moved to Durham, which is a lot more flat and has a lot more biking infrastructure. So I got back into cycling. And yeah, I've been cycling pretty much ever since. Um, and it's been a good ride. I think cycling for me is different from going for a walk. Going for a walk is just as much about the mental aspects of it and getting into that headspace. I get a lot of ideas when I go on walks.
Mm.
But cycling for me is also just about like releasing tension in my body. Sometimes I listen to music, sometimes I listen to a podcast. I'm not really in a place where I can jot down ideas, so I don't get as many ideas there. But yeah, I just you cover more ground quickly, and it just opens up my mind so much. Where it's just like if I'm overthinking, or if I'm in my head, or if I've been in meetings all day, it's just a great way to get out and just move my body and release some of that tension. So I like it for that aspect for sure.
Yeah, and are you a competitive cyclist? Do you do a lot of races as well on top of the enjoyment?
No, I think I have been inspired to at least participate in a relay of some kind with a triathlon group. So that might be something that I do this year. My kind of, I know this is crazy, but my Masogi for the year is to do a 100-mile cycling ride. So that's my goal for the year. But beyond that, no real competitive spirit here, unfortunately. Yeah.
Sometimes it's good just to do things for the enjoyment, isn't it? That's the bottom line of what we should all be doing, is looking to find the fun in these things.
Yeah, we do Misogyun during mine. Yes, okay, great. So I don't sound crazy. Good, good, good.
What's misogi? Because I don't know, I'm ignorant in.
I got it from Jesse Eitzler. I hope that's how he says his name, but he talks about making, one really big goal for the year.
Okay.
Um, and it's a Japanese term called misogi. And my misogi for the year is to do a 100-mile bike ride. So,
Oh wow.
yeah.
And what's the furthest you've done to date?
Not 100 miles, probably. It was, probably like a 15-mile social ride, I think. Yeah, 15.
Okay,
So
so
it's
this
like I
is
went to
a lot
different
more.
yeah, I went to, like, different breweries. It was part of a charity ride, so, donate money and go to different breweries, get drinks, and come on back. It was great. But yeah, and when I go out for a ride, I typically don't budget a lot of time for riding the way I should because I can go so far in like an hour and a half. So that's probably about my typical riding pace.
Yeah.
I do about between 10 to 15 when I go out for a ride. So I need to start working on my distance here if I'm going to hit that 100-mile goal. But we'll get there.
Do you have a route in mind and a plan for it? You got a group to help you through, maybe?
I should get one. I think my first goal was maybe to a get on a relay team for a half Ironman because that's about 56 miles. So work up to a half Ironman and then work up to maybe a full Ironman, which is about 112. But if I don't do that, when I was first started riding back in Durham, I was a part of a nonprofit called the East Coast Greenway Alliance. So there are a couple of like city to city rides that are about 100 miles. So there's a New York, and I could probably easily get access to the routes, but I could probably do a New York City to Philly ride. That's about 120 miles. And that would be two cool cities to do a bike ride between.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's a couple more. I think I could probably do like there's a route from DC to Baltimore that would probably be really cool. So there's a couple, and some Boston, Massachusetts to Portland, Maine. That would also be like probably about 100 miles by bike. So there are a couple that I think some city to city rides that I could get in 100 miles if I wanted to get in 100 miles. So
Oh
yeah.
well, good luck with it. Good luck with it. It sounds somehow I think I'm really terrible at cycling. I When I was a kid, we lived on a road that was basically like that, perfect hill training stuff. But at the bottom of it was pretty much a motorway. I didn't run up and down that road, by the way. I was very young, but it was too steep. My mum and dad very sensibly, I suspect, sort of looked at it and looked at the cars whizzing by 60 miles an hour at the bottom of our road and said, "You're not getting on a bike at that
Yeah.
age." So we moved house when I was about 12, but by that point I was running around and walking everywhere, and I just went, nah, I don't need to. So I've learned since, but I've never really done any proper cycling. So in some weird way, not that I've run 100 miles either. The most I've run is about 70 miles, but and that was a walk. um, but somehow cycling 100 miles sounds harder and longer than running it to me.
I don't think so. I think it sounds so much
It's not
better.
me.
Oh man, I don't know. I don't know. If you ride for 5 miles, I will run for 5 miles at some point. That'll be ideal.
So has running never been something that sort of interests you? You've obviously done a lot of walking.
Yeah, yeah, running has never had that same appeal. I just maybe personally felt like there was too much jiggling going on. It just looks uncomfortable, was uncomfortable for me as a kid. Yeah, I just never really got into it.
Do you think you could have your arm twisted? I mean, perhaps listening to some of these stories on this network, and that you're talking to people who are constantly telling you about amazing things they've done, not only when cycling but running as well.
Yeah, I mean, for a shorter distance, sure. I don't know
Mm.
if I'll ever see myself as like an ultra runner or anything, or someone who does marathons. But I don't know. It's been a YouTuber trend to like do a marathon completely unprepared. I will not be doing that, but I think that I could be convinced to do a little 5K for charity or something like that. I would do a shorter distance for a good cause. I could do that.
Yeah, do you know what? Actually, I think like we tend to speak to people who have, for understandable reasons, who've done incredible things, and sometimes when you're involved in those conversations so much, it seems like every second person is doing 100 miler or cycling 100 miles or doing a full Ironman or something ridiculous. Well, when actually for so many people, the peak of achievement is that 5 or 10K race. And I think that's really important to remember, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I received that. I received that.
Yeah, we're gonna get you out there. Go do your 5K.
I gotta stop being on podcasts on this because everybody keeps trying to recruit me to do something different, and I'm like, guys.
Let's rewind a little bit and Jason says the sales pitch is coming on hard. I've got to shout for the wonder of running. You'll love it once you're started. You'll never stop.
I don't know if that's the truth, but okay.
Let's talk about something that you definitely do love, and that is kind of storytelling, and you've been a writer. You are a writer. You are a broadcaster as well. When did that love of storytelling first come to you? Was it something you always loved?
I think it also came when I did the Camino de Santiago. One thing that I'm learning about myself is that long distance journeys, not by car or by train or by airplane, really unlock something for me. So when I did the Camino de Santiago in 2014, I didn't have any kind of camera or anything. I just had my phone, and my phone factory reset itself like a month after I got back from Spain. So I have
Ah,
no pictures from that event. And I was like, never again. And so I worked the whole summer and I invested that money into a camera and I haven't looked back. I did the Camino de Santiago in 2023, so 9 years after the first time. And after that, I was like, I journaled every day and I was like, you know what? I want to start writing long form. And so I
yeah,
did. And then later that December, I started um, writing my newsletter, my first newsletter. So I'm hoping that with my next long distance, either bikepacking journey or cycling ride, that it will unlock something else in me. Um, and I'm not sure what that is, but I'm excited to be open to whatever happens. Um, I've been pleasantly surprised with the journey so far. I think it's been really beautiful to tell stories in the way that I do. And yeah, I don't know. I never actually thought about that or articulated that until now. that long distance journeys have really what's been unlocked the storytelling kind of part of my brain. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really cool, and I think there is something about those long distance stories that can really get you. You got the time to think and dwell on things in a good way and start to come up with all those sort of wonderful ideas as well. And did you always, when you sort of got into it, did you always think, I'm going to do this across and as a few different mediums, with photography and writing and broadcast and film and so on, rather than just simply, oh, I'm going to be a writer?
No. So other famous last words are, "I'll never do that." When I first started photography, and I would see like these elaborate, like when I started photography in college, there was a definitive gap between photographers and videographers in a way
Yeah.
that there is not now, right? Almost every camera has to have pretty good photo specs and pretty good video specs, but that was not the case when I first started. This was before mirrorless cameras came onto the market.
Mm,
So there is a definitive gap. And I knew that that gap was one, expensive, and two, required just a separate set of skills of being a photographer. And I just said, you know what, I'll never do that. I was knew a lot of people who were in the filmmaking industry that had really big, expensive setups, really heavy looking setups. And I was just like, I don't want to walk around with all of that. Fast forward to 2018, I had started dabbling in videography. I was like, you know what? I'll never miss a movement if I just press record. Like, this will be great.
mm.
And I got into videography. So that was the end of that. I'll never do that. And now look at me now. I'm doing whole documentary films by myself. And then in terms of writing, I coming from the documentary space, there isn't a whole lot of writing there. Um, but I did a political campaign in 2022, and Abbott Elementary came out around that time, and I had another group of friends locally in the Raleigh area who were doing their own mockumentary. And so I think I just got like really enraptured with like the mockumentary style because it is part like truth, but also part comedy. And I
Yeah.
felt like my personality as a human really resonated with that style of filmmaking. And I was like, I think I can write a mockumentary. And so that was also part of the writing journey. Like, okay, how do I blend a current interest with a past interest? And that was kind of the start of me into writing. And then, of course, that got accelerated when I went to Spain again and was like, no, I want to have a writing habit. I want to publish something. And like, yeah. So famous
Yeah.
last words. Never say, I'm never going to do that because you probably will. So,
Yeah, I mean that is so true what you say about the kind of development due to these amazing things that we can carry around in our pockets now that kind of do everything, if not to quite the same degree as a full on camera, but not not so very far off in a lot of cases. And I mean, I remember in a past life as a print journalist, and I'd go out with the newspaper's photographer, and they'd be and the I was told when you start, I'll make friends with the photographer. They'll be the most important person you can get on side, and the thing was to carry their camera for them. That would keep them happy when you're a young junior, and so you'd be carrying this huge camera around with you everywhere on behalf of your photographer, and that was not even taking into account another machine that you might need for shooting video or whatever. And it's all so completely different now. Where I ended up 3 or 4 years ago at the BBC, and we were being given training courses where mobile phones were being used to capture amazing kind of documentary footage and news footage in war zones in real time and sending it straight back. And those changes have just been they've just been absolutely incredible, haven't they?
yeah, it's been great. I think it's for the betterment of the industry because it just makes everything so much more accessible. Like you don't have to be a part of some Hollywood studio to get access to a really good video camera.
Yeah.
So and especially in my case, there's now a lot of stories that I get to tell, that I can tell a lot less expensively than, a big agency can, but it's still stories that are worth telling, in my opinion. So I still have access to do that in a way that's meaningful and gives people the quality that, their stories deserve. So I appreciate it. And I think a lot of people appreciate it, but I do think that because the gap is so small between like hobbyist and maybe amateur and maybe pro. Um, I think that we're shifting the way we think about what is pro and what is a story that deserves a big screen or a big platform.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I wonder whether like sometimes you obviously have these machines kind of give everybody access, which is great, but they also give everybody access, which is not always quite so good, is it? Both in terms of the quality of what they're producing and just plain what they're producing sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that is, I don't want to make excuses for people who probably do demonstrative things with these incredible pieces of tech and camera gear. But I will say that for the mass majority of people, people are trying to do something just cool and fun and
Mm.
impactful. And I think at least now that it's out there and we're aware of it, we can do something about it. Like we can course correct to
Yeah,
decrease like the amount of negative things happening or just not great things happening. But I think it's all in that good though, for sure.
yeah, definitely. And when it comes to some of the documentaries and the writing that you've done, we've obviously focused on the stuff you've done around I suppose sports and so on. But you do that's not the only field that you've worked in, is it?
Right, right. Yeah, I would say like most of my work has been in like the outdoor environmental justice kind of space.
Mm.
Um, and so I've been kind of like sports adjacent for a while because a lot of people who run, a lot of people who bike, a lot of people who walk use greenways and trail networks and are part of those films. So
Yeah. Do you think there's a real kind of connection then between, I guess, the environmental movement, if that's the right phrase, and the people who do sports like running and cycling and so on?
absolutely, absolutely. I would say that a lot of the people that bike on a regular basis are not actually your competitive people in your local community. A lot of people who bike on a regular basis are people who are biking to commute. They're biking to just get around. And a lot of people bike to commute because they care about the climate, they care about their environmental impact. And they're saying, well, if it's, something shorter than 5 to 10 miles, why not use my bike? Why would I move my car for that? Especially if I'm not hauling anything, which most people are not. Um, Jason says, living in Seattle, you saw so many people riding bikes to and from work, to and from coffee. It was gorgeous to see. It is gorgeous to see. It's freaking great. And you know what I've noticed on my bike when I'm riding, because I've ridden downtown to go hang with friends or just riding for personal recreational sport, people wave more. People are not waving at you in your car unless they're waving you off the road or they're flipping you off or doing something crazy. They're not doing nice hand gestures when they're, but when they're on the bike, people are waving, they're saying hello. If you stop for any reason, people are checking on you. It's just, it's just so true. I mean, like it's just a friendlier environment. It's a great way to meet people in your local area. And, sometimes you see regulars on the trail, people with their dogs, people with their strollers, just all types of people. And so it's just a lot more like face to face contact and just great, great vibes, on the trail. And so I think we should have more of that, if nothing else. It humanizes people more when you're on the trail. So,
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I do the same. Out running, you wave at somebody coming the other way, sort of thing, and then everybody does that and says hello and so on. How do you think that message can get across to people? I mean, is it a case of getting it into schools? Because much as we're a community here who kind of knows this already, but the vast majority of people, sadly, are probably still getting in their cars and taking that for even 5 minute journeys round to the shop or whatever.
yeah, I think the answer may rely on the parents because I think there are a lot of parents who may want to be able to walk their kids to school or may want their kids to walk to school with other kids or bike to school, but there just isn't safe infrastructure for them to do so. And I
Mm.
think if parents really felt like infrastructure should be made safe for kids, then it would happen because making infrastructure safe for kids makes infrastructure safe for everyone. And that's what we need really is we need to push for infrastructure that's great for everyone, not just for able-bodied people who have the money to afford a car. And I think there's been a lot of different initiatives around this. I'm a part of or I'm on the board of an organization that advocates for this type of stuff, and we do a lot of things to meet the demand that is, safe biking, education. But ultimately, a lot of it comes down to people need safe places to walk and bike and get access to the bus system. And a lot of that comes down to people understanding who benefits from this because people, even if you're driving, you benefit from safe walking and biking infrastructure. If less people are on the road, one, your commute time is going to go down and it's going to be safer. You're going to be less likely to get into an accident. And for people who are walking and biking more, that becomes an option for you not to always use your car, for shorter distances. So it really helps people just get active. It helps people be safe and it helps people be seen. And those are really important things when it comes to just getting outside. So,
Yeah, I mean, I know in the UK, and this may be, I suspect, is different in America, but it might have. I'm thinking ultimately the same. This cause the same problems. Is we obviously have a pretty old infrastructure. We're an old country that's been around for a very long time, and some of these. I mean, the town I'm in, Northampton, it goes back to the Doomsday Book and 1066, and it's an old place built with narrow streets and so on. And the council here have tried to they try sometimes to put like bike paths and so on in, but then you're just really cramped between bikes and pedestrians, or you've got a narrow road and people on cycles are having to dodge in between very busy traffic in some areas of the town, which upsets drivers and gets them making all those strange hand gestures you were talking about earlier. And so it doesn't really work, and it's really hard to kind of, I suppose, solve that problem. And I'm thinking in um from it's a huge country and every city's a bit different, I'm guessing, but in America you've kind of got new cities with huge roads with the cars on and so on, and which weren't necessarily built for cycling and walking and running infrastructure
yeah.
either. Is that fair? I don't know.
So I would say by and large, America is just newer than England.
Yeah,
So our
yeah, yeah, for
infrastructure has largely been built around cars. What I will say is that there are a lot of projects and emphasis around reimagining our roads. So when roads need to be repaved, it's like, okay, we could repave the road as it currently is, or we could take this 2 lane down to a 1 lane and give that second lane to a multi-use path, right? Or we could take this 6 lane highway and put it not here. We can not destroy a whole neighborhood. Maybe we can actually use this to connect people in a different way. Because that's something that we're looking at here in Durham, reimagining a major highway here, part of it at least. And there's also just a different history of the roads here. So a lot of highways were used to divide communities and to
Yeah,
disrupt communities that were previously there, which is unfortunate. So I think uh, we are doing a lot of learning about our history right now. We are, from the outside looking in, learning very freaking slowly, but we are in a stage where we are learning about our history and we're trying to work with the present tools that we have to not necessarily just correct, but or rewrite, but to reconstruct a better vision for our communities right now based on the skills and tools available to us. And so I'm hoping that that continues to happen. I'm hoping that what's happening at the federal level is just a bump in the road in terms of a lot of the progress that we have made in people being more aware of how car centric some of our bigger cities are and how we can learn from some of the places that have done a really great job in implementing um, different types of infrastructure for people that aren't just car drivers.
mm.
And
Yeah,
also, I just want to say too, one thing that I like to do sometimes at night, and this is how I know I'm really relaxed, and I'm really deep into British cycling culture because I'm really relaxed when I see them like riding around on their bikes and like they'll come up to a car and the car will like slow down and allow them to pass. And I'm just like, wow, imagine if we did that in America. That'd be great. We can all share the road then. But no, road sharing in America is a complete myth. It doesn't happen.
Oh well, I don't know. I mean, there's probably a few British people listening to this going, oh, "Do you know what? That does not happen here either." there are a lot of there's a lot of arguments that tend to happen still between those in cars and those on bikes, despite the fact that occasionally, everyone does get along. And we also seem to have this thing where it gets, I think it gets passed along to the next. The next mode of transport down, if you like. So lorries will bully cars, and then cars will bully bikes, and then
Yeah.
bikes will go on the pavement and run into runners, and then runners will get in the way of pedestrians, and the poor pedestrian there's no one for them to bully at the bottom of it all.
Yeah.
They've got to go for a walk. But yeah, hopefully we can find a situation where everyone can kind of walk together, because as we said earlier, it does have this, getting out there and doing this exercise has such a positive result on people individually and on those groups that run together that we spoke about, and on I think communities as a whole, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. Healthy communities are vibrant communities. Healthy communities are active and engaged communities, and healthy communities are supportive. And that's what we need more of, you know.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about what you were saying about the kind of, I don't know, I don't want to get too political, because this is a running podcast ultimately, but
Yeah.
I think maybe there's a habit, and perhaps someone will say this the complete opposite way around, depending on what their views, but they look and they go, Barack Obama, bright new future, everything's going to be wonderful. Donald Trump, oh my word, everything's going to be awful. And actually, the world tends to, these huge figures have a big impact, but the world, as you say, tends to just carry on below the surface, and that is perhaps where real change happens.
Yeah, I like to think so. I like to think that, and I maybe again, I'm from Alabama, so I have a very probably different opinion than most about where change happens. But I do think that change does happen at the grassroots level. Like, do I think that there are negative and positive consequences to every federal, leader? Sure.
Yeah.
Do I think that overall that is the end all be all in what happens in society or in policy at that point? Not necessarily at all. Um, so I do wish that we got past that as a people. Like I just don't think it really affects largely what we're able to accomplish as people, right?
Hmm. And do you think sometimes that big messaging takes away from uh, perhaps more important things closer to your heart, like the environmental question and so on? We're not talking about that enough because of all the other noise.
I think the environment in general is one issue that just gets pushed to the back burner because it never feels like an ever-present, like urgent need, like healthcare or the economy, or I don't know, insert other thing here.
Yeah.
Um, I think it just I mean, like you can't even name three politicians probably that ran on, the environment or environmental justice being probably a hallmark of their policy stance. Um, I think, it's unfortunate that we kind of keep having this thing where we're like, oh, California's on fire. Oh, Asheville, North Carolina just got flooded. When the hell did we think that was going to happen? Like, we haven't, when it's like too late almost, we have those conversations. But,
Mm.
um, and in terms of people running on that, I just don't see people, they just haven't. And I don't really know why. I don't know why that's not a bigger thing. People aren't running on like, I'm gonna make more bike trails. It's just not a big calling card for people running for office. I don't know
Yeah.
about in Europe or in the Britain, but not in America at least.
No, I think some Green parties have done okay in Europe, and because of the system of voting there, where you've got almost a proportional representation system, that gives smaller parties a chance to be in power a bit more. So if you're a Green Party and you poll say 15%, well, you might actually end up with a position in cabinet or whatever. Whereas with the American system, which I think is it's quite different, but it's broadly based in a way on the system we've got in the UK in terms of like one vote means one vote for each party. Obviously, you've got a two-party system there, but we've
Yeah.
pretty much got a two, maybe three-party system here as well. And it just means that if you poll 10, 15%, you don't end up with anything. So we have the Green Party that does okay here, but I think it's got one, maybe two members of parliament, which is very hard to make a big difference. And probably with as with it with most countries around the world, I suspect the bottom line comes down to money and who's got it, and everybody wants a bit of it, so they vote for the when you're talking down the cafe, you care about the green policies. When you're at home or in the voting booth, you vote for the party that's going to bring you the most money in, or that seems to be the case with a lot of people. But that's just my random opinion, and we've already moved on away from running and cycling and podcasting. So,
All
but
good. All good.
it's all good. Yeah. I just wanted to maybe move back on track on that, and obviously as a podcaster, Jason. Sorry, Jason just mentioning Isaac Kenyon in the UK. He really is a great person to follow when it comes to environment and endurance sports. We had Isaac on the Running Tales podcast because he's a big runner and adventurer as well. Back before we became part of Everyday Athlete Podcast Network, and yeah, he's a fantastic guy on environmental issues. But yeah, sorry, I was going to move on and just mention quickly about, obviously as a podcaster yourself, when you're out cycling, do you listen to podcasts, or do you tend to listen to music, or just the world as it goes by?
A mix of all three. It just kind of depends on the day. If I'm going on a new trail, I'll typically listen to music, so that people can hear me coming and they recognize that that's music. I think if you're listening to a podcast, sometimes I listen to them out loud too. Like I don't always listen in my Bluetooth like headphones when I'm cycling. So sometimes if I have on a podcast, I think people just think that two people are talking and they don't
Yeah,
recognize that I'm coming like on my bike until it's too late. So typically, if I do listen to a podcast on the bike, I do try to remember that and I'll put it like in my headphones. But sometimes I just like to go without anything. Again, it's a time for me to be free. It's a time for me to get out of the house. And sometimes too, I'm going after a string of meetings. So
yeah,
I don't want to hear any voices. I'm good with just the sounds of nature. And, that's good enough for me.
yeah, definitely. I mean, it is a really good way, whether running or cycling, to get out there and connect with nature and just get away from all that buzz that's a constant in life today.
Yeah.
And as you know, one of the other podcasts in this network is What's in Your Earbuds with Joe Harden and Ohm, and we love that. So if you were to be able to get something on their little playlist that you listen to when you're out cycling, what would you suggest? Because we'll have to twist their arms and get them to add it.
That's funny. My artists or two artists that have kind of had me, well, three, let's say three. Three artists that have had me in a chokehold lately. Dochi, Grammy winning Dochi. We love her. Been following her for years. I'm so happy to see her kind of getting her flowers on a national stage. Leon Thomas, for a lot of people, like for me, I met him when he was on a kids show on Nickelodeon, and now and then he became kind of a songwriter for some of your bigger female artists. And his last album was incredible. Love it. He did a Tiny Desk in February. Love Leon Thomas. Highly recommend. And then last but not least, I gotta give it up for Duran Bernard. Duran Bernard is also like R&B type, but he's really been coming into his own. He did a really great EP last year, and he just released an album last month. So those are my top three right now that have been in my earbuds. So
Oh, awesome. There you go, Joe. Get those on the playlist. It is the most eclectic and frankly brilliantly ridiculous playlist. I don't know if you've Jason's telling them right now, so we'll get those on there. If you don't know, What's in Your Earbuds is Joe and Ohm talking about music that everyone does, and they've created a Spotify playlist off the back of it. And this is just saying, Angela, I don't know how much you've listened to it. It's the most random playlist in the world. It goes from like crash heavy metal to R&B to I think DuckTales. The DuckTales theme tune is on there,
I love
which
it. I love
always
it.
gets me going.
I love it. Those are the best. Those are the best. You get to discover something, but also hear something familiar. So it's nice. It's nice.
Yeah, no, I really like the I like the playlist, and it's something I certainly stick in my ears when I'm out running and on my own, and yeah, just it's the funny ones that come up that really get you going. I mean, Joe's had a friend who's put a load of weird spoof ones on there, and there's some Halloween ones on there because they did a Halloween special thing, and they when they pop up in mid-February, that's nice and weird as well.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, good stuff. So, Angela, what's you mentioned a couple of things earlier, I think, but what's coming up on Melanin MVP for people to listen to soon?
We have the episode with Montgomery Bike Club. That's going to be coming up. We actually are doing a documentary on the Selma to Montgomery bike ride. That's going to be coming up. That's probably going to be one of our first YouTube videos. Um, And in terms of just articles and stuff, March here is March Madness, which is what we call the NCAA basketball tournament. So I'll be doing a lot of coverage for that and trying not to make it too women's basketball heavy, trying to mix in some other things. So we'll be talking, but this month I do get to indulge myself with women's basketball, so I am going to do that. So that's what's coming out this month. Yeah.
Good stuff. And aside from in this podcast network and so on, where can people find your work and find your writing?
Yes, so we do have a newsletter. You can sign up at www.melaninmvp.com. And you can find me hanging out on LinkedIn at Angela Hollowell, or you can find me on Threads, also Angela D. Hollowell.
Superb. Oh well, yeah. I love the podcast. I love listening to you. The guests you've had on so far have been great. So I'm really looking forward to some more of them. And yeah, looking forward to catching up with some of the other good stuff as well. So Angela, thank you so much for joining me today on the Running Tales podcast. We are going to get you out doing that 5K. But seriously, seriously, I wish you all the best with the 100-mile bike ride, because that is a properly epic thing to try and do, and good luck with that, because that would be brilliant. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on Running Tales today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So, folks, that was Angela Hollowell. I hope you enjoyed that episode today. I really enjoyed chatting to Angela. I thought that was a fantastic conversation. I know we went off on a few subjects other than running, but that's a little bit what Running Tales is about. We're not really a podcast that goes into talking about training plans and VO2 max and all that sort of stuff. We like to go off and explore people's stories, as well as the athletics and running and so on that they do. And the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network has a little bit of that as well. We've got a little bit of everything for everyone on here as well, telling the stories of everyday athletes as often as we can. We will be back here on Running Tales in another 2 weeks' time, where I think, if I've got my timings right, we will be speaking to none other than Adam Lee of Food Fight Friday and much more fame. Of course, he's the host of the brilliant community trail running podcast as well. So go and check that out, folks. I might have to start thinking of some weird and wonderful foods that I can throw at Adam on a trail. So yeah, Adam's up next. We'll have that in 2 weeks' time. Check out all the previous episodes. Do please give us a positive rating, a positive review. Subscribe and follow us wherever you listen. We're looking to build this network as much as we can, so we continue to be able to tell stories like Angela's, like Adam's, that we're going to do in a couple of weeks' time, and like all the other guests we have on here, because it's an honor and a privilege to tell those stories, and we really enjoy it. And I hope you enjoy listening to them as much as I enjoy chatting to people on here. So yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for a